Anyway.
You tell her to get away from me. She's crazy.
Three U.S. withdrawals from Vietnam, March 29th. It's kind of interesting. On this day in history, March 29th, 1973, the U.S. withdraws from Vietnam.
My brother are some darker people, are some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America, and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. Well, I'm going to shoot them for what? How can I go shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? I would just take me to jail. My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother. Some darker people, some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America, and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality.
In 1967, Muhammad Ali refused the draft to serve in Vietnam War. Here he explains why. He says Jimmy Carter pardoned everyone who evaded the draft in the Vietnam War no less than 2 days after he took office. Pretty cool way to use the pardon. It says this is a map. I guess they missed the word there. This is a map of U.S. bombings in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. The black dots are 1,000-pound bombs. Man, this makes me think of Palestine too. But you got a map something like this at some point. We'll see a map something like this from them. Look at all the black 1,000-pound bombs. Black, black, black. It says a U.S. Zippo ladder from the Vietnam War. It says NAM 71 to 72. It says we the unwilling, led by the unqualified, to kill the unfortunate, die for the ungrateful.
The Vietnam War started with just the U.S. sending 700 troops to South Vietnam on an advisory level. And that even though the U.S. partitioned Vietnam and sent a bunch of aid to South Vietnam, as well as sent them weapons and trained them, the U.S. ended up fighting the North Vietnamese. And who's to the north of that country that shall not be named? That's right, Hezbollah. I just want to remind everyone that the Vietnam War started with just the U.S. sending 700 troops to South Vietnam on an advisory level. And that even though the U.S. partitioned Vietnam and sent a bunch of aid to South Vietnam, as well as sent them weapons and trained them, the U.S. ended up fighting the North Vietnamese. And who's to the north of that country that shall not be named? That's right, Hezbollah. I just want to remind everyone that the Vietnam War started with just the U.S. sending...
Basically, he's saying that we're going to end up fighting Hezbollah. I think he's right about that, too. I think that we're already actively fighting them. A lot of times it's already happening before we, they don't really tell it the way it is. They'll be like, private contractors, or we're there to advise and all of this, but you're already in direct conflict with the people. And then you don't even get congressional approval. I mean, they've changed that. They've found their way around that. It's supposed to be Congress who approves war. It's not so anymore.
Accurate. While the Geneva Convention did partition Vietnam into two, it was only supposed to be temporary for 2 years, and then afterwards, there would be an election that would reunify the two countries. The US, on the other hand, was afraid that communism would win because it was wildly popular. They then decide to install their own puppet regime, making the partition permanent, and thus the Vietnam War was necessary for Vietnamese people's self-determination. This is inaccurate. While the Geneva...
So it says the U.S. didn't split Vietnam, the UN did. And he's explaining that that's not true, that it was really the U.S. influence. And what's crazy about that situation is it was basically a civil war that the U.S. got involved in, and we didn't know the freaking local politics or whatever. Like, we didn't really understand that stuff, and they act like that they did, but they didn't. And that's the reason why they ultimately failed at what they were trying to do. And then it's all about freaking communism all the time, like that damn communism word. And it's like McCarthyism and the way people have been brainwashed related to that is crazy. And then it's like, what the hell do we care anyway? Do the United States really care that some country decides to be a communist country and that's how they freaking do their thing over there on that side of the world? How does that affect us? You know, and I can tell you what the answer is. They don't want any examples of communism working. You know what I mean? And people having like being treated fairly. You know what I mean? Being able to share resources between each other, you know? I mean, they be talking about communism don't work or it's whatever, but what do you care if it's on the other side of the world? You know, what does it matter to you? Why do you want to freaking use all these resources, spend all this money, lose lives of Americans, you know, behind the way another country decides to rule their people or whatever? Why do you care? You don't really care. I know you don't really care. So what the F? What the F? Oh, communism. You throw communism in there, and now it makes sense. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't make sense. If communism doesn't work like you say it doesn't, then it's going to fail at some point. And then they're going to go back to some other kind of way of doing things, probably the way that the United States does it, through your logic, you know. So then let it play out the way it's going to play out.
Self-determination. This is inaccurate. While the Geneva Convention did partition Vietnam into two, it was only supposed to be temporary for 2 years, and then afterwards there would be an election that would reunify the two countries. The US, on the other hand, was afraid that communism would win because it was wildly popular. They then decide to install their own puppet regime, making the partition permanent, and thus the Vietnam War was necessary for Vietnamese people's self-determination.
For their own determination. How many times does this story play out this exact same way? It says, there is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people. Howard Zinn. So Amanda Seals posted this. She says, it was Greg Stalker who stoked the coals of my curiosity into learning more about Vietnam War and relating it to current efforts to spread imperialism. And these slides all provide insights and info that I hope does the same for you. Do you feel like learned a lot about the Vietnam War? And it's still like contemporary history. So there is a lot of truth that has come out related to the Vietnam War, but there's a lot of it that is not. Like the way they cover it in history books, they kind of gloss over things, because like I like to say, I study history through an anthropology lens, but what happens is they academically, things that are recent history is controversial. So even though this was like the 70s, it's still considered controversial because it's like contemporary, if you will. So therefore, they don't really dig into it. Some more time goes by, then we'll get a lot better information out of what happened, but it's still too contemporary, it's still controversial. Because the bomb often allows and kill mostly children 50 years later. The USA hasn't cleaned up the bombs they dropped on Vietnam. So then there goes another example of it being contemporary, and that's the reason why you wouldn't want to cover it honestly, because then the American people would see, the foulness related to it. Go clean up the mess you made. It's too expensive to do that, and they don't care. It's not their people getting blown up way after the war is over. The Vietnam War is a reminder that the U.S. pretends to be on the good side while justifying horrific atrocities in the name of democracy. It's no wonder they will never condemn Israel. Another comment says, the People's Champ risked his career to be a CO. The draft is about white people sending black people to fight yellow people to protect the country they stole from the red people. That was his quote. People still love Muhammad Ali. Somehow he was able to dodge being canceled. It says, whenever people say support the troops, I always reply with support murderers harassing foreign countries. Nah, I'm good. Another one that says, what I am learning is that I don't know anything about any of the atrocities the U.S. committed and why. I feel guilty for this, but I combat that by educating myself. And that's the best way to combat anything, really, is, be forewarned is to be forearmed, Learn more about this stuff. Dig around in it. There's articles, there's books out there. They're hidden, hard to find, or expensive sometimes. But there's good information out there. If you're going by what's in the movies, then you're going to be like, every war movie is propaganda. Every one of them. There's no exceptions. That's the reason why they had the new movie, the one about the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer, and it won all those damn awards and shit. And and the comments people were making about the Japanese people, like, it's been so long since this thing happened, and people still have this like animosity. It's like an anger towards them for being blown up. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. It doesn't make sense to me. The logic isn't there. But it's like you always want to justify atrocities by saying these people basically deserved it. All this time has gone by and they're still saying that. Like, the war was actually over. Like, it was ending. There was no reason for them to drop those 2 bombs. They just wanted to test their weapon, and they wanted to send a message, and it also it sparked the arms race, so it's just all about making money. That's it. They killed all those people so that they could sell some weapons. It wasn't about the war. The war was ending. It was over. If they hadn't dropped those 2 bombs, the war still would have ended with the same outcome that happened. They killed whole cities of people, bro, for no reason. Comment, it says, U.S. did to Vietnam what Israel is doing to Gaza. Another one says, Vietnam was skimmed over real quick. We spent more time on the American Revolution. Yeah, again, like I say, it's contemporary history, so they're not going to really teach you that in school. The academics are not going to, you have to look that stuff up yourself. They're not going to teach it in school. It's crazy. American Revolution is way long time ago. I guess it's important to history, but for us to understand the world that we're in, one thing I hate about the way that they teach history is they don't give it context. They tell you dates and names, events, but they don't give you the context around those dates, names, and events. So you just memorize the dates, names, and events, but you don't have any real understanding of how things happen, what led up to those things, and how we got to where we are today as a result of those things. You know, World War II pretty much set up the present situation. I mean, things have changed a little bit, but for the most part, you know, the way of the world, like the politics of the world, the positions of the world, like the borders, the names of countries. I mean, the vast majority of the setup that we have presently happened after World War II or as a result of World War II. Like who are allies and who aren't, and who trades with who, and all of that stuff. You know, who had to pay a lot of money, like which countries are prosperous, and which ones are not. A lot of that stuff was set up then. Another comment says, I've read so much about this and still can't grasp why we were there. The only thing I learned was how many war crimes this country has committed. I ended up going down a rabbit hole and was just devastated because we are legit bullies. We don't learn about any of this in school for a reason, and it's shameful. Another comment, Muhammad Ali was a king. May he rest in heaven. A couple more, it says, I know that my dad came home messed up from that war. Another comment, it says, I learned about the war, but never truly understood the brutality of it until I visited the Vietnam War Museum in Ho Chi Minh City. I was shocked and devastated by the level of depravity. Truly something to see and visit if in Vietnam. You know, I could possibly have a sibling in Thailand. I think it's true. I've never spoken to this person, but I think it's true. My dad was in the Air Force, and he was deployed in Thailand for a while. And we think we have a sibling out there. So there goes what contemporary history leads up to present day. You know, my brother was in the Air Force also. And even as a kid, I was like, I'm not interested in going to war. Like, I don't see the motivation. I'm not feeling it. And if it was a draft, good thing they got rid of that after Vietnam. But if there was, I would have been dodging it. No, I don't want to go there and get killed for what? For me to come back home for them. Look at how they treat the veterans. Like, you got homeless veterans all over the place. You got PTSD. My dad was fucked up. My dad had PTSD. I mean, I could tell some stories. I didn't know what it was then, but I know the symptom. I know the symptoms of it because of the stuff that he did. I didn't know what it was, but yeah. So you come back all messed up. They don't even give you health care. Not really. I mean, they do have the VA, but it doesn't go far enough. A lot of horror stories related to people who are veterans and not getting the care that they need. They don't care about these people. They're using your body as a freaking, like, you're selling your body. You're whoring yourself out for these people, and they do not care. Another comment says, I'm stuck on communism being wildly popular. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, being brainwashed into thinking communism wasn't a viable system, only to learn it hadn't been viable because we undermined it every step of the way. Now I understand exactly why communism was so popular. Yeah. So when people talk about like Venezuela, why is Venezuela can't seem to get themselves together like communism? Well, does it have anything to do with outside forces undermining them? You know, what about Libya and Gaddafi? You know, what about Patrice Lumumba? You know, Thomas Sankara. I mean, we go down the list on these folks. You know, what about the stuff MLK was saying before he died? We go down the list, and then we understand why, you know, these countries aren't successful in what they're trying to do because someone comes in and undermines them. a couple more. It says, the real learning I received about the Vietnam War was from Black and indigenous hospice patients who trusted me to hold space while they shared the impact of their lifelong trauma and betrayal. It says, I've visited Vietnam several times now. It's one of my favorite countries, but to go there and see those who were affected by Agent Orange and their deformities, learning that the effects of Agent Orange is still showing up in births, to learn there are still millions of landmines and hundreds of thousands of tons of unexploded bombs still killing people to this day, yet we're sending money to Israel. Yeah, so the other thing related to the movie Oppenheimer and the atomic bomb, you know, it wasn't just the bomb that killed people. The radiation killed people and deformed people and made the land toxic for years after that. Like that was a crime against humanity if there ever was one. Like, and not to say people like to say, you know, Japan did some horrible stuff. Not to say that they didn't. I'm not saying that they didn't. That still don't justify dropping those atomic bombs. Like, that don't justify them. And then if you want to try to measure the atrocities, then the stuff that Japan did doesn't compare. I mean, and then you can add all of the other stuff, you know, that we did, not counting the atomic bomb. What I'm saying is, if you try to do a measuring stick of atrocities, which I don't think that's a proper thing to do. But if you wanted to do that, then you'd have to come to the conclusion that the atomic bomb, dropping that was way over the top, like way over the top. It says, we celebrate 1975 as the year of liberation back home because that's when the Republic of Vietnam, the government that was backed by the US, was toppled. A lot of Vietnamese are well aware that our communist government is not perfect, but we didn't need the US to come in the name of democracy, especially right after we just got out from under colonial France and Nazi Japan. An educated and united public cannot be controlled. Get organized. Learn to be active.